Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Happy, Peppy, Get Excited Brain Balance Live. I say that because I am excited to learn from Heather every single time we come together. So, even though the topics themselves are heavy, we are here to help you lift your burden and not feel alone, right, Heather?
That is 100% right. Yes. I
Yes.
mean, and we throw some humor in there too to lighten it up, even though the topics are serious.
Yes.
And I mean, one of the top things I hear from parents is issues with impulsivity. And of course, this can apply across the lifespan because about 90% of, and this isn't just about ADHD, by the way, although that is a hallmark sign of ADHD, but about 90% of adults had ADHD as kids. It's not like they developed it, aside from a traumatic brain, something that impacted the brain, but it doesn't just go away. It just sort of evolves into other things. And so, and that holds true with impulsivity too. On the flip side, I will have, when their parents are filling out their paperwork, they might put 0 or a really low number on impulsivity. But then on other questions, they talk about how they rush their assignments, they interrupt they start, but it all depends on what your connotation of impulsivity is. We really want to look at what the broad definition is and all the different ways it can play out. And that's really what the first slide is about, because it's not just about risky behaviors, although that's a very important one, to note. But do your kids get in trouble for blurting out answers in class or blurting things out, interrupting others around the dinner table? That is impulsivity, because it's when we do things, act or speak before hitting a brake pedal and thinking about it first. And so what about oversharing? That can be scary for a younger child who, no stranger danger, and they tell adults who may not have good intent things that about themselves that they don't need to know, and then they can kind of trick the kids into thinking they know the family and jump in the car. It can be oversharing on a date, and then that is something that, or in friendships, you have to have discretion. Issues with reciprocity. This could be turn taking in a game, impatience, rushing in when it's not your turn. It can be having reciprocal dialogue as opposed to a monologue, stopping to hear the other person's point of view. We're going to talk a lot about emotional reactivity on the next page, actually the next couple of pages. There is such a huge tie between impulsivity and not just unhealthy eating habits. And I'm not talking about having an ice cream from time to time, but we're talking about habitually that happening. There's a huge link between ADHD and other neurodevelopmental struggles and eating disorders. I mean, you have to think about what are the long-term impacts on my health of doing this. Lacking perspective, jumping to conclusions, missing the big picture. I get honed in on this telescopic view of something that's not to my liking, and I react based on that. Let me take a step back. What's another way of thinking about this? What is someone else's POV? And I'm right, you're wrong. A lot of these tie in with things we've talked about before. Flexibility, big picture thinking, social skills, and so on. Trouble with initiation or task completion. And as well as distractibility. These things, you're like, that's impulsivity. Yes, that is a huge component of it. For example, I am supposed to be doing my homework. There's a video game, or my friends asked me to go to the mall with them, whatever. Shiny object, something that's so much more enticing. Self-regulation, which impulsivity is an issue of self-regulation. Nope, I'm going to ignore those distractions and stay the course, hone in on what I'm supposed to do. It is quite common for us to assess kids whose attention itself is fine, but they are very distractible. All distractibility leads to inattention, but not all inattention is distractibility. Being able to tease those things apart, there are many types of attention. And even with alternating attention, somebody drops a book in class, human nature is I'm going to look over. Having the flexibility to get right back on track and resist the impulse to keep checking it out. We've talked about many types of attention before and distractibility, but procrastination is not an issue of time management. Procrastination has to do very consistently in the research with the avoidance of uncomfortable emotions associated with a particular task, project, person, or situation. Too much spending. This one, of course, this could be allowance as kids, but as adults, you have trouble with the budget. You see that, oh, that's a pair of shoes is so gorgeous, must have. Even though my whole paycheck's already spoken for, I've got things, like rent or mortgage,
Yeah.
school supply, and that doesn't make you a bad person. This is impulsivity. Unsafe, destructive acts, that can be aggression toward others. It can be, man, I put up a post yesterday about some of the stats for teens and young adults with ADHD on driving. Like they have a 62% higher chance of having a crash within the first month of driving, 150% higher chance in the first 4 years of driving of having multiple citations or being pulled over for driving under the influence of various substances, not just alcohol, multiple collisions. The collisions tend to be more severe. There are more deaths associated with this. And of course, that could be inattention, like I'm driving along the road, there's nothing that's stimulating me, but then also impulsivity, road rage, cutting somebody off. We could apply this to a whole lot of things. There's an enormous link between neurodevelopmental struggles and suicide attempts. So I know this isn't fun to talk about, but it is important to note. At a younger age, unsafe could be kids not realizing that I shouldn't climb on top of the shed and jump off because I could break my leg or worse. Right. Are they really making careless errors, or or why are they making careless errors, I should say? Sometimes that's visual perception. Sometimes the sensory information, they're misperceiving it. But so many times I can't pace myself. I can't take my time and read through the whole question. A lot of our kids, on one part of our assessment, there is an impulse control part of that. And it's things like, we get milk from cows. Cows drink blank. Your brain wants to say milk, but if you pause for a second, wait, they drink water like we do. They give us milk, but they can't. It is just as much of a cognitive skill to stop and think about what you're being asked before you answer as it is to know the actual answer itself. And so I want to make sure that we understand that if that happens, that doesn't necessarily indicate apathy. And that is so often these kids get called lazy or apathetic when really they're lacking that brake pedal. Yeah. But it doesn't, it's not helpful for us to say, stop and think before you act. That's like asking me to build a rocket ship. Don't do that. I mean, you can ask me and I'll be really nice about it, but I would forbid anyone from getting into the rocket ship that I would build, because that is not a capacity that is in my realm of expertise. Okay. But there are things we could do to grow it, but that is not helpful. In fact, it can be really harmful, and it can come across like we think kids are making a choice to be impulsive, when in fact impulsivity is almost the lack of choice, that it is acting without thinking. So yeah, even when we tell kids to make better,
in my house, like big time.
Yeah. I mean, so many times that seems innocuous. We need to make better choices. If we have neurodevelopmental struggles that lead to impulsivity, these choices are not about morals, choice, character, personality. I didn't have time to make a choice because 95% of our thoughts are automatic. I acted right away. Did you know sometimes even 20 to 30 milliseconds can be the difference between the behavior being what you would want it to be in a situation and not? That sounds impossible to believe, but it's true. Those with ADHD need 20 to 30 more milliseconds to fully get into our logical mind. A lot of research says we need 6 seconds to be able to get out of that.
Wow.
But if anyone thinks, wow, I didn't know all of that was impulsivity, now you may know that this applies to your kids as well. Because it's not just about risky behaviors. Yes, the stats on promiscuous sex and substance abuse, but think about how all these things impact relationships, confidence, academic outcomes. I mean, is there an area of life where some parts or all of these don't impact multiple areas of life and quality of life, not just for them, but for those in their lives? And it's not about personality or character or choice.
No.
Okay.
I look at so many of those traits and I can see myself in them, because we've talked before about this. I feel like I was probably not diagnosed, and I probably have ADHD, but like I was smart enough to procrastinate and get my work done. Like, and I for some reason did better under pressure when it was due in an hour, you know?
Yep. That is, and one of the reasons that's so funny you said that, because last week I put up because we did time management, and I was delineating procrastination from time management. But just last week, you should go check that out. I put up the types of emotional procrastination, and one of them is the dopamine driver. And that means I get excited now. Now it's a challenge.
Yes.
And knocking it out at the end. The issue with that, and there may be, I mean, there is truth to that, but some of our kids can't delineate. This is something that no matter how exciting it is to do it at the very last minute, that dopamine hit that I get. And by the way, dopamine is a rewarding, feel good, motivating chemical. And it gets just on fire when there's like a challenge involved, or it's novel, or this makes it interesting. But do kids have the perspective to say, okay, maybe there's a reason they gave me a semester for this project. It's because you can't do it correctly in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so, but that's one of the types. I put up types of emotional procrastination. So it's really important for us to understand that a hallmark sign of ADHD and many other neurodevelopmental struggles is emotional impulsivity. And I don't know that that's evident if you don't live in this space, you know, like I do. It deficient emotional self-regulation. And so that is D for emotional SF, DESF. It is deficient emotional self-regulation. It is not in the diagnostic manual. I think that's going to change very quickly because of the vast amount of research showing that should be a hallmark. That is a hallmark sign. But emotions precede behaviors. Our kids need to know that. We need to read books with them and talk to them about that. I'm going to talk about a lot of other layers here. But there are 4 primary broad strokes abilities of self-regulation that fall under this that can either cause my actions to be impulsive or not. And the first, look at that word, inhibit. What is impulse control? It is inhibition, top tier executive function skill, to inhibit appropriate behavior triggered by strong emotions. What if I don't have that 20 to 30 seconds extra, milliseconds that I need? Self-soothe and down-regulate intense emotions. This is all about granularity. Kids, we've talked about this before, but how do we not talk about it again right now? Emotional granularity means that I understand that there is a broad array, range, spectrum, shades and degrees of emotions. Just because I'm mad doesn't mean infuriated. Just because I'm sad doesn't mean devastated. Just because I'm uncertain about something doesn't mean it necessarily means anxiety or being terrified. When we help give kids words for a broad array of emotions, frustrated, disappointed, glum, that they're just so uncertain. When we give them these words and talk about what they mean and how they're different, kids actually start experiencing emotions on a level more in keeping with what really happened. That is powerful. It's not just that they learn to cope with them, but you have to be able to down-regulate that infuriation, if it truly is infuriation in the first place. We never tell them that's not what they're feeling. We provide information and context. I wonder if what you might be feeling is this, because I've been through something similar. And at first I thought I was mad, but when I thought about it, I'm like, no, I'm just really disappointed in what how I feel like my friend treated me. What do you think? Is that how you're feeling? Or you still think you're really, we always have to validate that we're giving them perspective. They also must be able to refocus attention away from emotionally provocative events. Remember when I just mentioned switching attention? That doesn't just apply to the tray of dishes that dropped in the restaurant that I looked over to check out. Do I start ruminating on this thing that happened, which is just going to amp up the emotion more? Or do I have the regulation to switch gears? Let me get my mind onto something positive. What can I control about this? What can't I? I can control my emotions, my response, my choices, my friendships that I choose, what I spend my time spent. what I spend my time thinking about, easy for me to say. But that's also part of switching attention and the ability to substitute healthier emotional responses for the reaching of my goals, for my long-term welfare. I need to be able to ask, is what I'm about to say healthy? Is it a good idea? Is the food choice I'm making good for my long-term health? Why do I care about that?
Yeah.
So we have to get to impulsivity. What is causing the impulsivity? And this, we have to get emotional regulation under control, because large emotions lead to large behaviors that often are not what we want. That the emotional brain takes over and my logical brain is no longer in charge. There are many parts of the limbic system, that the emotional brain, that get in the way of kids and adults with neurodevelopmental struggles controlling impulses. For one, the amygdala, the guard dog of the brain, that is tells us to go into a fight or flight response if we have physical threat, danger. It's overactive in those who struggle with emotional regulation. They will go into a fight or flight in a state of overwhelm and do before you think, without the presence of physical danger. So they may end up throwing, kicking, hitting something, getting much more annoyed or frustrated easily, and it's harder to talk them down. They may lie in this state. It's not my fault. I was waiting on you. You were supposed to help me with this. Johnny did it. Lack of taking responsibility, not telling the truth. They might be trying to buy time, because if they have slower processing speeds with learning differences, things like that. So many things happen here, but there's a thalamus gate that is supposed to take in all of the information, sensory input, and then send behavioral responses to other parts of my brain about how I should handle it. Oops, that's not working. So I want it to be really clear, there are physiological differences that impact emotional regulation, but our brains are pliable. We can do things about that. And on the next page are just a handful of examples of ways that emotional struggles begin in the brain. This is specific to ADHD, but there are many types of emotional dysregulation with or without that diagnosis. Intense reactive emotions, reactive, impulsive, emotional reactivity is impulsivity, are a hallmark of ADHD because of congested brain connectivity networks responsible for handling emotional information. Those who do not have emotional struggles, you got that 10-lane highway on that interstate in your city that you wish had 10 lanes. It's not bottleneck traffic. We got to grow new neural pathways. We know how to do that. 98 to 99% of, a new term, this is politically correct, ADHDers suffer from rejection sensitivity dysphoria, in which real or perceived rejection or disapproval is debilitating.
Social media does not help with that, does it?
No, it doesn't. But imagine, we have a lot of kids who are oblivious to certain cues. Mm-hmm. That, wow, what I did hurt that feelings. I need to redirect that. Others will read in disapproval that is not there if what their communication partner is conveying to them is anything other than overt happiness and approval. And if you're not talking like you're in one of the shows that, Jen probably uses some really good animation and intonation and prosody in her voice when she's performing for Disney. But sometimes we are serious. We're trying to give instructive feedback about this thing, and your child might feel indicted as a human being. You remind your spouse sweetly. You're trying to be helpful remember, honey, about emptying the dishwasher since we have people coming over tonight. You're trying to be helpful, and what they hear is, you think I'm disrespectful. So the rejection sensitivity leads to opting out, perfectionism, task avoidance, people pleasing, risky behavior, suicidal ideation, rage, etc. The ADHD brain often doesn't delineate between real and perceived threat or major danger versus a bump in the road. Catastrophizing, all or nothing. It's either great or it's horrible. A 0 and a 10, it's a flip, not a dial. There are some things that are 3, 4, 5, 6s on the level of severity. Emotions are tied to working memory. In ADHD, this is often weak and decreases regulation. This is not intuitive. We all have this mental sketch pad where we hold information. And let's say that Jen needs to call the doctor, set the annual physical for one of her kids. And what all does she need to think about? She needs to think about, when's Corey available to be with the other child? What does my schedule look like? What is his work schedule? Does he have that extracurricular that day? I had this question about medication. You load up your brain with everything you need to make that call. As soon as that's taken care of, you wipe the slate clean, you reload it with the next thing. What can happen with kids who are struggling in any way, ADHD or not, learning differences, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, anxiety, emotions, and the struggle, the way I'm having to work harder to do tasks that other people take for granted, starts filling up that whiteboard. I don't have room on that slate to consider your feelings or to think about consequences, because the sketch pad in this moment is already full. These are just some of the ways the brain is different. We can't punish kids. We can. It's ill-advised to punish kids for things that are outside of their control, and it's important to know what is and is not inside their control. Doesn't mean we don't teach them. We can let them have natural consequences of things, but we need to recognize where it's coming from and make sure we are not assigning negative personality or character labels to these things. All right, let's move on. So one of the things is we need to teach kids, and this is helpful for individuals of any age, handling emotional encounters. Let's say that your teen is invited to a party and there's going to be a group of people there who have been picking on them, maybe bullying, or their boyfriend is there. My boyfriend cheated on me. We just broke up. I'm just thinking about this. Ask, is this emotionally charged scenario worth it? Is this a slippery slope for me? We do not want to teach our kids avoidance at all costs. We have to learn to grow their perseverance muscle. We have to let them know that they can do it. But if you think about the benefit of that versus my child is super duper impulsive and this isn't going to go well. Is there a chance that and if they're on a level they can, engage them in this conversation? Is it worth it? Have them kind of think about what may happen and what they're going to do. If you decide, yes, it is, I really want to go. It's my best friend's birthday. Okay, we need to create a plan. What are some likely things that are going to happen at this? Well, you're going to see David, and y'all just broke up. Sarah's going to be there, and you're upset with her because of what are some scripts? Come up with scripts, write them down, practice them, role play before entering that emotional situation. And then remind them that if you're about to blow up, take a break. This is not the same thing as silent treatment, pouting, like punishing the other person. You're in this interaction. I'm going to take a break. And the reason I want to do that is that I want to resolve this. I care about our friendship, and I'm going to be able to express myself better if I just take a break for a minute. I care too much about this to keep talking right now. So they don't feel abandoned. Tell trusted people about your emotional patterns and how to talk you down. If you're going with another friend, you know that I've struggled with sometimes blurting things out that I later regret. So if you see that happening, and if you have friends who know what these cues are, ask them, are there any physical cues I give off that you have seen me do repeatedly right before I end up saying that thing that I wish I hadn't said? Ask, talk to your kids about that if you've noticed things. And then whether it's humor, whether it's, hey, I'm thirsty, let's go get a drink. I see that your water bottle is empty right now. Or, by the way, how about taking a water bottle with you? If you want to talk with your hands, holding a water bottle makes it harder for you to talk with your hands. You can have a physical cue that reminds you to slow down what you're saying. Remind yourself that the strong feeling will fade. It doesn't mean the feeling will fade at all. The severity of it, what goes up must come down. Emotion. This is a really good way for kids to remember this. It's emotion. That means it travels through you, and it does not stay up at the peak. Having these little mantras that you remind yourself of can be super helpful. This is temporary. It's going to ease up. What are some things I can do to ease it up? Deep breathing, stepping outside, getting some water, talking to my trusted friend. Somebody needs to tell me a joke, because when I laugh, it calms me down. Coach yourself to consider the other person's perspective. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. Is it possible that I did do something that could have been misconstrued, even though that's not what I meant by it. Sometimes I'm in my own little world and I'm fretting about the test coming up. Did I walk by Sarah in the hallway at school and she thought I was ignoring her? That kind of thing. Also, the fact that I can't control how Sarah feels. I can control what I do and hope that she does the same with hers. Although kids can't fully control if they're impulsive, but there are things we can talk through. Understand too that impulse control is in the front of the brain. Our brains grow from the brainstem, the back of the brain, up and forward. This is the direction they grow. And the prefrontal cortex behind your forehead is not fully developed until about the mid-20s. The most recent research even says until around age 27 or so.
Wow.
But it is stronger in teens than it is in kids, younger kids. But keep that in mind. That they used to say 18 to 21, and more recent research says 27. Doesn't mean we don't work on it and think, well, it's just going to grow into it at age 27. You know if this is an issue with your kids, because that holds true of all of us. It doesn't mean that all kids who are teens are being impulsive, or all 9-year-olds are being impulsive on the level you're thinking of it. This is an issue beyond the quote unquote norm. Separate feeling from acting. Emotions do precede behaviors. That is true. However, that feeling does not have to be the master of us. When we are aware of this, when we are aware that 95% of our thoughts are subconscious, and that is going to evoke an emotion, and I have this tendency to jump into it, is this feeling that I'm feeling going to lead to a positive emotion or not? You are helping move these things into the logical brain by having these conversations. After cooling off, explain that you had better intentions than what you conveyed. It does not mean you don't own it. The tricky thing is we don't want to tell kids to apologize, because what if they don't really mean it? And then we're teaching them insincerity. How do you feel about what you said now that you think back on it? Do you think David knows that that's how you're feeling? I wonder if it'd be a good idea. You want to try to get them to get there. It does not mean you're making an excuse. This is exclamation, not excuse. There is no excuse for the way I talk to you. I do want you to know that what was in my heart was this. And you know me, I blurt things out sometimes. I don't mean. I love, talk them through. You're owning it. It is explanation. But we can't get mad at them if they don't give us grace in that moment, because we can't control their response to that. It's really good to have dress rehearsals. The same type of thing can apply at work. If you're an adult going to a job and your boss just raised expectations, your quota for next month is going to be raised 300%. And you're sitting there thinking, are you kidding me? Maybe write down talking points so you don't blurt something out, beforehand.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
And I have gotten better actually about this for myself, is that they always say the unexpected thing. It's like I prepare for all these things that could happen, and then there's one thing I didn't think of that then happens, and like I have to tell myself it's okay sometimes to be like, let me think about this.
And it is so crazy that you said that, because I was literally about to say that phrase. There are things that you can teach your kids to do, or that we can do as adults. If you don't know what to say, if you're frustrated, you're afraid it's going to be sent to bed, or you just want to buy yourself time. My boss has already been on my case, and now I'm going to say, I don't know. You can, that is such a good question. Let me think on that for a second. I have a couple of thoughts swirling around, and there are little lead-ins that can buy you time. That nanoseconds to 6 seconds can be all the difference in how well you handle something. That is so, I felt like literally there was osmosis.
Yes.
That's so awesome. That's perfect what you're doing. So,
well, thank goodness.
You're so good.
I'm learning things.
So I don't know if I can take credit for that, but yes, you did great. That's perfect.
Thank you.
When we have conversations with our kids, we want to make sure we are not shaming them. We've talked about how we don't want to pick negative personality or character labels on our kids for neurodevelopmental struggles they're facing. It is also such a great idea to help kids see the positive side of impulsivity. For any characteristic that we have, we can use it for good or bad. Stubborn can come out as defiant. It can also be absolute determination and grit, right?
Yeah.
Impulsivity can also be spontaneity. So you're also going to open up your kids' minds, and help them not be so maybe defensive, if that is a tendency. It can also help us as adults and as parents to remind ourselves of the positive side of the coin that comes with spontaneity. It's exciting. It helps people find others very interesting. There's creativity involved. And how about mom and dad saying, I admire how spontaneous you are? How often do we tell our kids we admire them?
Yeah.
We might tell them we love them. I admire how spontaneous you are. You might even say something. Sometimes I wish I was a little bit more that way. Sometimes I get stuck when I'm trying to make a decision. But you're spontaneous. That is such a strength when you consider consequences before you act. So you're not saying, but. It's not like, I admire how spontaneous you are, but you're not pausing to think about that kind of erases what you just said.
Yeah.
That is such a strength when you consider consequences before you act. That is the biggest difference between spontaneity and impulsivity, is that with spontaneity means I don't get bogged down and overthinking and stuff, but I do hit pause to think about consequences before doing something. Do I consider the ramifications of what I'm doing? What a positive way to present that information. And when we present it that way, you're not going to get so much defensiveness usually. I like, and you can tell me some things you like about being spontaneous. I like being spontaneous because that is when I do my greatest artwork. That is when I, come up with my best ideas. My friends think I'm really fun because I'm spontaneous, that kind of thing. That is so great. Now, and if he can come up with this independently, great. Or you can kind of remind. Now, we talked about what's the difference between spontaneity and impulsivity? Thinking about consequences. I've learned I need to think about XYZ before I make decisions. Is it safe? Is it a good idea? Is it going to hurt someone else? Is it going to hurt me? Is it in keeping with my values, my long-term goals? Talk through those kinds of things. Strategy rehearsal is really important. That we kind of gave an example of that on the previous page. You can do that through books, movies. There's a lot of movies where you can pause and talk about those things as you go along. If Jason says this, what are some different ways you can handle it? Teaching kids body mapping. There are physiological signs that we are about to escalate before it actually happens. And so help kids know that. If they like to draw, draw a picture of themselves, or you can pull out any coloring sheet or anything online just that's a body, and have them draw on the body. Oh, I feel swirly down in or they could draw a butterfly inside their stomach.
Yeah.
Tension in their shoulders. I've noticed I furrow my brow, I clench my fists. Have them draw those things, and then help them know, did you know those signs come before the emotion gets completely huge? We start doing these little subtle things when our frustration has gone up from like a 0 to a 3. If we catch it then, it's so much easier to bring it back down. So then once they start noticing those signs in their bodies, what are some things you can do to regulate? For little ones, it could be blowing bubbles. I mean, it can be taking a deep breath. It can be doing some stretches. It can be calling a friend, telling a joke, taking a walk, getting out in nature. A listening walk is fantastic. We want to really get a lot of nature and movement in, because there is plenty of research showing that movement and motor skills are extremely tied to the level of impulse control one has. Just like we coordinate our bodies, we can coordinate our emotions, our thoughts, and what we do. There is a direct link there in the research. Limited screen time is important, because there is also research showing us that too much screen time decreases a lot of executive functions, a lot of those getting stuff done in life skills, including self-regulation. Feelings thermometer is such a fantastic way for kids to start understanding the shades and degrees of emotions. If you Google feelings thermometer, ones will come up. And if they're young, you could have a thermometer that has 5 levels, totally chill, good to go, neutral, over the top. You can have like 5 layers. You can have 10 layers. And then beside that, write down things they can do when they get to those points. Games are so good for growing impulse control, and they're fun way to do it. Simon Says requires me to pause and wait to hear if you said Simon Says before the thing that I'm supposed to do. You're also growing motor skills. Have them do cross body motions. Have them do things that require using the top and bottom of their bodies, and have them tell you things to do. When they get to also be Simon, it gets buy-in. How many games there are that you can't say the word in the clue, like heads up, you hold it up, and I need to get you to say the word Sunday, but I can't say the word day. You have to hit a brake pedal to think about words to avoid. What a fun way to work on that. There are a lot of games where you can't say part of the clue for them to get the answer. Plus, board games are just fantastic quality time. Red light, green light. You can have code words if they're with friends. Instead of saying, you're getting impulsive, say, are you being a green car, yellow car, red car? You've talked in advance about the speed of the cars, right? It's field day today. You're going to run a 100-yard dash. Are you going to be green car, yellow car, red car? Green car. That's right. When you're, let them know there's a time for all of those cars and all the speeds. How fun if you do this running route where you play chase in the backyard and you green car, yellow car, red car. There are just lots and lots of games that grow regulation. Think about anything where you have to pause. I can't say this word is part of the clue. It's not just things that are obvious. There's also ways where you can switch up if your kids are younger and they do movements to songs, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, but have them do like head, shoulders, but the shoulders is the toes. Do things in reverse, only if they know their body parts, because now we'd be confusing them.
Yes, don't confuse them.
Changing the rules of any game where you have to pause. The natural thing is this, but nope. We're playing a game where hearts are spades and spades are hearts, just so that anything that you're causing a pause. Okay, lots of ways to work on this in a fun way. You've got physical games that help them have to pause. We learn first in our bodies, our sensory motor system. It translates to cognitive development. All right, let's move on. Some other hints here. Some good little mantras. Play the tape to the end mentally. Do you know that you could even role play it because you're trying to, I don't want to do this. Sometimes if you film it, we live in digital age, there's positive ways to use this. How about play the tape to the end and you play it out different ways depending on different ways that you handled it. When you brainstorm alternatives, what's another way I could handle this? You already are going in with a set of options depending on exactly what happens, right? And then you need to list and review consequences, not just negative consequences, positive consequences. This separates spontaneity from impulsivity. If I chose alternative A, what would be the likely outcomes? How would Susan feel? How would I feel? Would I get my work done on time? Would I still have a budget at the end of the month where my bank account's not on zero? What is the scale going to look like at the end of the month if I'm trying, I'm working on my heart health and trying to lose a few pounds? Think about all the different ways it plays out. Sometimes even carrying a card with you, if you have a particular thing about impulsivity, like, oh, there's such a good donut shop right across the street from where I work. How will I feel if I buy that donut? I am going to feel lethargic all day. I'm going to feel guilty. Then I'm going to end up starving myself because I feel guilty because I consumed all those calories. And then I'm going to have a crash. I'm not going to be functioning well because I did not get my protein. Whatever your goals are. I need my waist size to be this to fit into this tux before the wedding this weekend because I gained weight after we got it altered. I mean, whatever it is. And then you just review that. You can even set reminders on your phone to remind you to review the consequences. That can be a whole lot of help. Examine underlying emotions. What is leading to this? Why? Why am I impulsive in this particular scenario? Do I get caught up in emotions? If so, that has a lot to do with the feeling things larger that goes along with ADHD and other neurodevelopmental struggles. If you're just getting swept away with emotion, that often is ADHD or another similar type of struggle neurodevelopmentally. Or is it truly, sometimes we attribute everything to the ADHD if our kids have ADHD. Am I acting out of dread, fear, avoidance? There might be anxiety involved. You got to make sure that we're addressing all parts of this, even without a diagnosis. Knowing what underlying emotion is I feel like my spouse thinks I'm irresponsible, and that really hurts my feelings. And so then I end up popping off and saying this. Um, I don't feel good enough. I feel terrified that of what's going to happen here. Why do I feel terrified? Maybe I'm uncertain. How can I feel less terrified? Figure out the underlying emotion. Swept up versus acting on fear and dread, that can really be a delineator. There might be some anxiety that's masked by the other stuff. Is this impulsive or intentional? Spontaneity is intentional because I already considered the consequences. By waiting, though, we've talked about the nanoseconds, the 6 seconds. Another thing, like if it's homework time and your kids are so distracted and they keep jumping up from the table and it becomes a war, a battle. Some kids hate timers, but if they don't, you can try this. It's called the Pomodoro technique, where you set the timer and they can see the time going down. And when they get to the end of that, they get to engage in that thing that they're wanting to do right now instead of homework. If you're about to do an impulse buy online, wait 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, do you still want that shirt as badly as you wanted it 30 minutes ago? If it's a big purchase, how about 24 hours? I will not do this until I talk to my spouse. I will not do this unless 24 hours from now, I am 100% as excited about it. I've already listed the consequences. I've brainstormed, why do I want this? And then if you do, maybe it's okay to go for it. By the way, another thing is to give grace. Make a joke about it. Sometimes if you name impulsivity, like give it a name, that's Jimmy. You know how Jimmy is. And it does bring some, I mean, you laughed when I said that. It does bring humor. The humor alone can kind of start shifting the emotions, but also that can really help with decreased shame for our kids. There is this separate thing apart from who I am in my heart and soul. It is this little guy on this shoulder. I need to listen to this guy. Even talking about where they realize it's separate from my identity. It's not who I am. It is something I struggle with. But will it be as appealing later?
I think mine's going to be named waiting. Gladys.
That's okay. Is there any particular reason, or that's just a cool name?
I just like that name, and I think that she's just ready for action all the time. She just makes choices. I actually don't have. I'm actually like underreactive about making decisions, so I have an opposite problem.
Yeah, and that can still be regulation though, because the procrastination on making a decision. What if I don't make the right one? That can still be rooted in anxiety, but play out the opposite way. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
That is, it can be anxiety, or I'm trying to avoid this uncomfortable emotion associated with the fact that I'm going to judge myself and think I made the wrong decision. I didn't make the perfect decision. That can even be tied with perfectionism. What if I don't make the perfect choice?
Yeah.
But it can play out exactly differently. It can be paralysis. Anxiety often leads to paralysis. But it can also lead to impulsivity. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
I should have said that. Self-maintenance, mindfulness, and self-care. Self-maintenance is sleep, eating healthily, exercise. If you don't enjoy that spin class for the sake of the class itself, like it is just fun as all get out, then that's self-maintenance. Sleep is very tied to impulse control though. Very, very, this is about refueling your tank. Sleep is very tied to impulse control. So is what we eat. But mindfulness practices, I show an example of somebody, what feeds your soul, refuels your tank. This is about recharging your battery. Is it hanging out with friends? Is there a nonprofit activity a cause you've always really cared about that you've filled up the plate with yes to-dos? What can you simplify? How can you buy back some time, peace of mind? That's all about self-care. But mindfulness, we need ADHD mindfulness. Maybe they're not going to be sitting on the floor with their legs crossed, doing this, but a listening walk. It can still involve. We're gonna play a game where all that exists is right now, in the here and now. What do you smell? What do you see? What can you touch? What kind of texture is that? Sensory experiences where we are only in the here and now. Deep breaths not only buy us time, they redistribute oxygen. When we get anxious, when our emotions get heightened, Do you know that impacts the oxygen and blood flow in our bodies? The
Wow.
reason is when we go into an actual fight or flight mode, all systems, not just our emotions and actions, but the nutrients in our bodies redistribute to our extremities for slay the tiger, fight off the attacker. The same thing happens in the absence of physical danger. So when we are doing deep breaths, belly breaths, when we are redistributing our oxygen, and we are increasing dopamine, lots of neurochemicals that get our mood right, that clear the brain fog. It's not just about endorphin. So all of those kinds of things are really good. But what do you care about aside from the roles you fill? When we are stressed out or burned out, when we are tired from lack of sleep, when we are not fueling our bodies with the right things, we are going to be more prone to be impulsive and make poor decisions. Okay.
Fun fact, every time you say deep breath, I take a deep breath.
Isn't that funny? It's kind of like the word yawn. So often somebody hears that word. And finally, we're wrapping up here. But if there are addictive habits you have, the strategy of inconvenience is super great. For example, if you are one, you're trying to have quality time with family, but if your phone dings, it's hard to resist and you're going to check it. Putting it on a high shelf across the room vastly decreases. There's been research done on restaurants that keep the ice cream little freezer open versus the door closed. See-through door to that thing. If the door is open, the sales go up something like 30% versus the door closed. They had one extra step to do to pull ice cream out. There's a reason why studies showed that smokers were glad when the cigarette tax went up, because it made them less likely to buy cigarettes. It made it more inconvenient for them. How can you prevent it in the first place? Like, don't buy those cookies and bring them into the house in the first place. Delay it. We talked about that one. Is it still as enticing 30 minutes from now or 24 hours from now? Hiding the clues would be closing a door like on an armoire or something. The game controllers are down there, but I can't see them. They're not right here at my fingertips in the console right by where I'm sitting. Raise the energy required. Okay, you want that donut? Fine. We can't go to the one across the street, but if we walk to the one 8 blocks down, we can get our donut. So, doesn't sound so great anymore. Raising the cost, I mean, that can be literal or figurative. Working out with a trainer who charges you whether or not you show up for your session. Do incompatible activities. If you are prone to just noshing, like, snack, even when you're not hungry, do a puzzle. Hold your water in your hand. Do something with your hands where you can't also, preferably not your cell phone if you're supposed to be doing family time. But do something with your hands. Have a Rubik's Cube or anything like that in your hand. Okay.
I love that. My kids love the fidget toys. So,
yeah. And those fidget toys are so great if they aren't noisy or obtrusive. If they are in class, by the way, you want them to not be visually appealing. But if they're not disturbing others, not super loud, but it's just more of the tactile of it, they're absolutely fantastic. Or it can even also be while you're watching a movie. That is one of the few examples of where divided attention actually works. A lot of times when we think we're dividing our attention, where our brain is quickly switching back and forth from one to the other. Honey, I'm on the phone with doctor. Okay, I'm sorry, doctor. What was that? Seriously. You're actually going back and forth. But when you're doing something that involves a ton of muscle memory and not a lot of thought, that actually can improve attention and being present.
I love that. All right. As you can see, we've got phone numbers here and the ways that you can contact Heather yourself. If you have questions, please put them in the comments. We always love to hear from you, and it might give us our next topic. So we're always looking for that. Heather, is there anything else you wanted to tell everybody before we go?
I don't think so. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to sign up for the newsletter we put out each week. It is chock full of activities, tips, research that contain, they're real life things. When my child is oppositional, how do I handle it? Or, all the topics are different each week. It has several sections, and we're getting really good feedback on that. So I encourage you to check it out. You just go find Jen's gorgeous mug on our pages. There's a little sign up button on underneath that video, and you're in. So
I love that. Well, I am so happy that we went in and got our assessment and went through the brain balance program for our son. You can get help for yourself, your kids. If they're struggling, there is somebody here to help you. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks for everyone sharing your time with us. Have a great week. Bye.